Okay, why don't we get started then? So today our topic is going to be political philosophy. Um, this is a topic that many people have requested in the past, and so I decided as our last meeting, we're going to talk about it. So political philosophy is the study of fundamental questions about the state, government, politics, liberty, justice, and the enforcement of a legal code by authority. Um, so there's a lot of questions within political philosophy. For example, one question would be, who holds power in government? How should leaders become leaders? How are the people's views taken into account? Will people have rights? If so, what rights? And what exactly are rights? What is justice? All of these are examples of questions within the realm of political philosophy. And today we're going to tackle the answers to these questions by several influential political philosophers. Someone says it glitched in the chat. Is it still glitched? Is it okay for everyone, the screen? Okay, hopefully it's not glitched. Let me know if it's still having a problem. So let's talk about the purpose of government. Why should we have a government? Why is government important? So here I brainstormed several possible reasons, like government could be to protect possessions, to prevent harm, to allow for cooperation, to enforce the common good, to protect the weak and limit the strong, maybe to protect rights, provide public services, etc. So besides this list of possible purposes of government, what other purposes of government do you guys think exist? Or if they don't exist, should they exist? Jonathan says, keep the country safe. Okay, so I guess that falls under enforcing the common good. So he says, help the country run smoothly and efficiently. Keep the country stable. Okay, so all of these are nice answers, but what exactly about government is so important and so unique that it cannot be enforced by just individuals? Why do we need a government? Like, what if we just had individuals keep the country stable and keep people from killing each other? Would that be possible?
Well, if we just had one individual that keeps the country, that kind of organizes the country, it's not very likely that they're going to always make decisions based on the rights of the people. It's more likely they have greed and depress and oppress the people, and
Okay.
it's not likely that they'll always help the people.
But can't you have a government with one person?
But I think that you can't exactly enforce and run an entire country by yourself. You're gonna have to hire a police force or an administrative system. But in the end, that's all risk. In the end, they're probably gonna turn on you, like the Russian Revolution. So it's hard to balance the wants of your people and the wants of your men. So in the end, it's impossible to keep that balance. So
Okay.
this power can't be held.
Hold on. I think y'all misunderstood my question. What I meant to ask was, why can't we just have individual people that don't live in a country? They just do their own stuff. That's what I meant. We're actually going to get to like monarchy versus democracy later.
So, are you talking about like an
Oh,
anarchy?
wait. I have an answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, like, maybe one reason could be because, like, there's some things that people argue about, some laws that people argue about a lot. So then the government would have to, like, very controversial issues. If there wasn't a government, like, no one would know who actually won the debate and what the law actually is, or when it changes.
That's a good point. Jesse, do you have your hand raised?
Like, for example, immigration, or immigration rights, or like stuff like that people argue about a lot.
That's a valid point. Yeah. Jesse, do you have your hand raised? Okay. Well, all of you had very good responses. I see Anna said in chat, it helps make sure everyone is on the same page. And there's many similar responses to that. Okay, one last hand. Anthony, go ahead.
It just helps tie together society, because
Yeah, exactly.
for society to function, everybody needs to work together, and if there's no government to keep that in place, then things can just fall apart.
Exactly. So I guess the main answer to this is a government is necessary to foster cooperation to allow the society to move towards a common good. Like, for example, take the example of roads. If you just have anarchy and a bunch of individuals, it's not worth it for any one person to build an entire road because like they're probably going to build it and then they might use it once or twice and then they die and then it's kind of useless. So if you have a government, you're able to enforce the common good by allowing for cooperation and allowing for these things to happen. So in today's lesson, we're going to be talking about two key people from ancient Greece, Plato and Aristotle, that have had a huge influence on political philosophy. They're considered the founders of political philosophy. And then we're going to talk about three more modern political philosophy thinkers. And those are John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and John Rawls. So we're first going to talk about Plato. I assume that most people know Plato. Plato is one of the key figures in political philosophy because, I mean, he's often seen as the father of political philosophy. His works and his ideas have been the foundation of so much of later works in political philosophy, and that's why he's called the father of political philosophy. Plato believed that good government requires good leaders leading from the top. He thinks that these leaders should have moral and intellectual excellence. So therefore, on the fourth point, we can see that Plato believed that the ideal ruler would be the philosopher king, someone that's wise and virtuous. So obviously, a philosopher king is not a democracy. So Plato was actually critical of democracy. He thought that democracy would be a bad system because there are some people that are not wise enough to vote and to have a say. Let's take the example of a doctor. Let's say that you developed like a medical condition that causes your leg to hurt, so you have to go to a doctor. Would you want to go to a qualified doctor that went to med school and knows how to fix your leg? Or would you have everyone take a vote on what you should do? Plato would argue that you should go to the doctor, and he thinks that it's the same thing for government matters. We should have someone who is knowledgeable and virtuous and wise on the top. Plato believed that ideal society has to have social classes. And he divided society into, I think, 3 or 4 ideal social classes. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but he thinks that society should be regimented. Finally, Plato believed that there's 5 types of regimes: aristocracy, democracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny. And he believed that he listed these 5 regimes in the order of which he thought, like, from the best to worst. So he thought that the best one is aristocracy, going all the way down to tyranny, which is the worst one. It's glitching. Is it still unstable, internet? Okay. Not anymore. Okay. So what part did I miss? I'll just repeat that. I was just saying Plato believed that there's 5 types of regimes, and these are the 5 types on the screen: aristocracy, democracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny. What's a democracy? It's similar to an. I guess it's kind of similar to in the middle between an aristocracy and an oligarchy. So it's not a I think it's not a monarchy, but it's a group of people that's ruling. So you can. I think that's what it is on the top of my head. I'm not actually completely sure. Okay. On the other hand, there's Aristotle. Aristotle's kind of the other side of the other kind of very influential figure from ancient Greece, ancient Greek political philosophy. Has everyone seen the painting The School of Athens? Okay. So for those of you who have, you might recognize this image on the right. So does anyone know what these 2 people are in the middle? Okay, well, just to answer my own question, these 2 people are Plato and Aristotle. Plato's the person that's pointing up to the sky, and he's the one in the red robe on the left. And then Aristotle is pointing on the ground or forward, I can't really tell. And he's wearing blue, and he's the one on the right. So this painting is actually symbolic of the differences in their thinking. Plato, which we talked about before, was a very idealistic thinker. That's why he's pointing towards the sky. He wants government to be ideal, and that's kind of part of the reason why he thinks that a monarchy, or that's why he thinks that a philosopher king is the best. On the other hand, Aristotle is depicted as pointing forward or pointing towards the ground because he's seen as more practical. So this practicality and this more groundedness of Aristotle really defined his political thinking, and it's a huge reason why Aristotle and Plato are kind of different. And by the way, if at any time my internet is unstable again, please tell me, because I don't want to say a lot of stuff and then repeat everything. Okay, so let's go into Aristotle's political philosophy. Aristotle believed, just like most of you in the chat, that society and communities are founded to achieve some kind of good. He believes that, in theory, monarchy and aristocracy are the best if there is a ruling class or family that is both knowledgeable and virtuous. So in theory, he kind of agrees with Plato. However, in practice, Aristotle preferred constitutional democracy, which we called polity. This is because he believed that he thinks that if there is a knowledgeable and virtuous person on the top that's able to lead successfully, that's really good. But he thinks that it's impossible to ensure that you're going to have a constant chain of rulers that are all knowledgeable and virtuous and good meaning. And he thinks that if we get like a bad monarch or a bad ruling class, that really screws the country over. That's why he prefers constitutional democracy with checks and balances in order to make sure that some bad people don't screw the entire government up. As I said before, Aristotle was similar but different to Plato. Classically, they have been seen as opposites, but their thought is similar in many ways. After all, they came from like a similar period of time and a similar culture. Okay. So does anyone have any questions about Aristotle and Plato? These are seen as the fathers of political philosophy.
Don't know.
Okay. Well, if you have any questions, if anyone has any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm not exactly an expert on political philosophy, so this actually took me some research to do. But yeah. So now we're going to go more into modern political philosophy. These ideas you're going to see are kind of different from Aristotle and Plato's ideas. And you might recognize these ideas more because they've actually been very influential. I'll talk more about that later. Before we talk about these three figures, so he says, wasn't Aristotle Plato's student? Yeah, he was. Before we talk about this modern philosophy, modern political philosophy, we're going to talk about the social contract. And before we talk about social contract, we have to talk about the state of nature. The state of nature is a world without a government and without a social contract. Basically, it's a thought experiment of what the lives of people might have been like before societies came into existence. As we're going to see later on in the slideshow, different political philosophers had very different opinions on this, which heavily influenced their views on the role of government. So before we actually talk about what these political philosophers thought of the state of nature, what does everyone here think about the state of nature? Is the state of nature without government and without community and society, is that good or bad? And what is it lacking? Or what does it do better than government? Basically characterize the state of nature. And Jesse, I see your hand is still raised. You can feel free to unmute if you would like to talk. And yeah, Alan says Plato was taught by Socrates. That is true. Isn't it? It's really interesting, right? Like these three huge figures in ancient Greek philosophy are each other's teachers. Chris says it's good because everyone is on an even playing field. Okay, so Chris, do you think that the state of nature is actually better than a state with society and government? Does someone want to explain in the voice channel?
I think in both intellect matters, because both intellect and strength are respected, because say in the world of government, like these big businessmen with like a lot of metaphorical power hold a lot of the decision making, but back then like a lot of brutes with physical power held the things, because as easily as one of these tycoons can strip you of can strip you of could like drive you deeper into debt. The brute could as easily bash your head in like in but then also intellect is respected, because a crafty politician can weave his way in and out of the systems, and like you can be smart as in like sneaking up behind the guy and bashing his head in.
Hmm.
Like different types of skill sets are respected though, but
That's a
there
good
will
point.
always be an alpha male.
That's a good point. Okay. That's actually a really interesting way to think about it. So, like, modern society is kind of similar to the state of nature, except we value different things more. Definitely an interesting response. Um, let's see people in the chat. So, actually, going back to Chris's comment about everyone being on an even playing field, is that really true? I mean, if someone's like 6 feet tall and he's really strong, and you're like 5 foot tall and you're not really strong, and then, as Anthony said, they could just bash your head in. So, is that really an even playing field? Susie says, well, in a state of nature, I think that there would still be a leader, follower, and people may still play different roles. Okay, so state of nature is without that stuff. If there's a leader in society and playing different roles, I guess that's like a rudimentary government. So not really state of nature anymore. Alan says, in a state of nature, people can just kill everyone off without feeling guilty, so we would all die. Yeah, I mean, that could be true. But you'd also have freedom, Alan says. Um, Alan, do you think that the freedom that you would have in the state of nature is greater than the freedom you have in government? There's an argument on both sides, definitely. Because if you think about it, sure, in modern society, you don't have the freedom to kill someone, but in the state of nature, you also don't have the freedom to walk around safely without being killed. Anthony says a society in the state of nature is the closest we'll get to communism. Actually, I don't think that's true, because I mean, I think communism is actually the opposite of the state of nature. It's like a huge government that imposes everything from the economy to politics to society.
Like sorry, not communism, Marxism, an ideal society where everything is shared, and like all the assets belong to the tribe, because like say back in the day a tribe lives in the cave. The cave does not belong to a singular entity like it would in a capitalist society. The cave belongs to the people. So and like the cavemen contributes, like they all grow in group hunts and stuff, instead of one caveman going on a hunt, hiring a few people to go on a hunt and then taking the meat back and then selling the meat to everyone else. Everyone.
Well, I think, I mean, going to a cave example, that isn't exactly, I mean, if everything belongs to the government, or if everything belongs to everyone in society, then that requires a very strong government to enforce that. So I don't think that's the state of nature.
But like back then everyone was willing. Back then everyone was willing, because like the outbreak of communism was happened because like there were a lot of wealthy people and like people with possessions, and then there's a lot of possessions, and those people didn't want to let it go, so that led to corruption. But then back then everyone was in like an innocent sort of state. They didn't know what this stuff was.
Okay. Well, that's definitely debatable. There's definitely another side of the argument. But we'll actually touch on that later, because you said that back then people were innocent. It's actually a pretty big disagreement between political philosophers, especially that, like, what is this nature of a person? Is a person naturally inherently good or bad? And we're gonna have that discussion in a bit. One last comment. Michael says it gets harder and harder to manage a lot of people in an ideal nature, so we need government. Yeah. So that's exactly what social contract is. These political philosophers,
Wait,
like,
can I say something?
yeah, go ahead.
So like, I think like you can do the ideal society state of nature society if